What if I told you that we could completely erase our carbon footprint, just suck all the CO2 out the air and fix climate change? No lifestyle changes, no big energy transition, just technology leading the way. Sounds incredible, right? Well, what if I then told you that the companies that are pushing this the hardest are actually the ones that caused the problem in the first place?
Newborn Oil will pay $5.5 million and invest $4.6 million to comply with clean air laws.
And then what if I told you that this miracle fix might actually just be a massive distraction? Okay, so here's the pitch. Carbon capture is being hailed as one of the answers to climate change. There are two important and distinctive types. We've got carbon capture and storage, or CCS, and direct air capture, or DAC. They're both very different processes and for very different applications. Governments love this. Oil companies love this. Even Elon Musk back in 2021 pledged $100 million for the best direct air capture solution. Before we go any further, we need to break this down a bit. DAC and CCS are not the same thing. CCS is used by power plants and industrial facilities to capture the carbon at the source. This CO2 is then pumped deep underground for storage, or more commonly, used for enhanced oil recovery, where it's pumped deep back underground to push more oil out of pre-existing oil wells. CCS costs vary widely depending on the application. So in power plants, where the CO2 is much more concentrated, it's between $50 and $150 per tonne to remove. And industrial applications, depending on the mix of gases, it's somewhere between $70 and $120 per tonne, depending on how complicated it is to remove just the carbon. There's a little bit more to add there as well, because you've got some transportation and storage costs, which tend to add between $10 and $20 per tonne. That's why the fossil fuel industry loves CCS so much. It allows them to keep drilling, but also claim they're reducing emissions for a relatively low cost. But there's something that's not talked about too much. So we know that CCS is used by power plants and industrial facilities to capture the carbon before it gets released into the atmosphere. And they either store that directly underground, or they push it underground into old oil wells to pull that extra oil back out again. Now, there's something we need to consider here. All of this effort to store the CO2 underground might not actually be working. There's a growing concern that all of this CO2 that we're pumping back underground might not be staying there at all. Some studies suggest that this CO2 is not actually being very well effectively stored. It's actually leaking back out through previously unknown fissures in the rock and back into the atmosphere, thus undermining the effectiveness of the storage. Yet, this is unsurprisingly something that's very rarely spoken about or discussed in open conversation. If this is the case, then all the money and effort that we're investing into trying to capture this carbon might be for nothing. And if that's the case, it's something we really need to start asking harder questions about. DAC is different. Rather than capturing the carbon at source, we actually pull it directly out of the atmosphere at any point in the atmosphere. That's particularly exciting because not only does it allow us to capture the carbon that we're emitting at any one time, but also capture historic carbon, thus potentially making it a solution for climate change. But it's also much more expensive than CCS, where CCS might be $100 to $150 per tonne. DAC at the moment, although it's still in early stages, is around $600 per tonne. So if DAC is so expensive, why are so many companies investing in it? Well, for industries like aviation or agriculture, where reducing emissions is so much harder, it provides us with a really great opportunity to offset some of the carbon that we're emitting into the atmosphere whilst we come up with some better solutions. On the other hand, DAC is being invested in by a much more diverse group. Yes, oil companies are still investing in that as a technology, as it's an opportunity for them, but it's also invested in by tech companies, in climate-focused startups, and even governments looking for long-term solutions to climate change. Companies like Climeworks, Zero, and Carbon Engineering are investing into these technologies as a potential future tool for offsetting past emissions, rather than an excuse to keep polluting. DAC is still in its early stages. Climeworks' Mammoth plant in Iceland is the largest of its kind, but it just pales in comparison in scale to the oil refineries that we see now. And this gives you some indication of how far off from a long-term solution we currently are. So, is direct air capture a realistic solution or just a high-cost fantasy? I want to hear your thoughts on the matter, so pop your comments down below and I'll get back to everyone I can. So, let's talk about and address direct air capture's biggest criticism, and it's all around energy. Currently, the direct air capture method takes between 200 and 400 kilowatt hours of electricity to remove 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere. Unfortunately, that is a much higher amount of energy that we would get from emitting 1 ton of fossil fuels in, say, a natural gas plant. So the argument, very rightfully, is why would we spend all of this energy removing the carbon when, if we were to get that from clean sources, we could just pump that energy back into the grid and offset the energy and then some that we might have created producing that 1 ton of carbon in the first place. Now, I think this argument has changed a lot in the past couple of years, particularly with the plummeting price of solar panels and wind. So getting that amount of clean energy has never been easier. So it's not as simple as it used to be. Now, we need to think about the complete picture here, because yes, we could use that energy to offset current emissions, but we still think we're going to need this technology to reduce other areas where it's going to be much, much, much harder to bring us to zero emissions, like I mentioned earlier around aviation, for example. So we still need the investment in the technology to bring the costs down, and the cost of that energy will also come down over time. Just look at what's happened to solar in the past 10 years. The price has dropped by almost 90%. If that can happen for this technology as well, then it becomes increasingly more viable. But as with anything, that's never going to happen unless we actually put the money behind it, do the investigation, and get our smartest minds working out how we can make this work best. This is why direct air capture needs to be carefully integrated into our complete decarbonisation efforts. It's not a silver bullet for sure, and we shouldn't be using it as an excuse to continue to burn excessive fossil fuels where we have better options. But that doesn't mean we should ignore it. DAC is going to play a critical role. So, is carbon capture a solution? Honestly, absolutely. It just depends on how we invest and deploy it. If we do it in a logical and sustainable way, then it's going to be an incredibly important part of our future energy makeup. So, carbon capture at the source is valuable because it captures carbon directly at the source to reduce overall emissions. While we'd all love to eliminate fossil fuels completely right now, the reality is we're in a transition phase, and CCS allows us to reduce our emissions whilst we're weaning ourselves off these fossil fuels. We just need to be ensuring that we are using that carbon that we extract from it in a sensible way that doesn't then get re-released back into the atmosphere. Direct air capture, on the other hand, has enormous potential for carbon removal. Yes, it's expensive and it costs a lot in terms of energy, but the right investment, costs will come down over time as the technology improves. If we can create viable business models around direct air capture, such as using the carbon in synthetic fuels for hard to decarbonize industries, or in the production of concrete, which is another huge carbon emitter, then it's going to be able to scale and become a major player in our decarbonisation efforts. The truth is, there's no silver bullet to climate change. We need a variety of solutions all working in tandem together. Emissions reductions, renewables, energy efficiency, and carbon capture are all key critical parts of the makeup. If we invest wisely and scale these technologies, they're going to be game changers in us reaching net zero. If you want to learn more about how carbon capture fits into the bigger picture, click here. What do you think? Is carbon capture a realistic solution, or is it simply overhyped? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out more of my videos on the channel. So, is carbon capture a solution? Yes, but they're only really part solutions to a much, much wider topic. I think they're really important solutions, but they're not going to be the silver bullet and they're not going to fix everything for us. We need to use them, we need to invest in them, but ultimately, it's not one solution to change everything.